school mascots or science blocks donated by a passing prince in a barouche. All we had was slightly mouldy netball bibs and lunches so dense it was a mystery they didn't appear on the periodic table. Nevertheless, I was determined, and nothing and nobody was going to stop me having a crack. Occasionally, I would meet up with my history teacher in a small cupboard of a room normally reserved for sacking members of staff, but other than that, a pat on the back and a wave from my parents, I was flying solo. My first brush with the university I was so obsessed with came on a damp Saturday morning in 1984. My teachers had urged me to apply to a college called St. Catherine's on the sole basis that they'd taken someone from my school 6 years previously and they might remember. One thing was troubling me greatly. Not my impending interview, for which I was considerably nervous, but the college itself. It was modern, built in 1962, and despite its relaxed location on the banks of the Cherwell, the glass and concrete buildings were reminiscent of a Newtown shopping centre. This was not the Oxford I have dreamed of in my bedroom. The glorious spires, oak-lined rooms with sash windows, and packed with old leather sofas that eminent writers and poets and politicians had once sat on. This was somewhere you might find yourself if you were looking for an unappetizing cheese pasty or getting a boil lanced. Still, beggars can't be choosers. I was at the Finder's Crispy Pancake College, and I had to do my best to try and get in. I was interviewed by two men wearing tweed jackets. They both sat in high-backed padded armchairs. The room smelled of coffee, and sitting on a low table in front of me there was a plate with a half-eaten biscuit on it. I stared at it. It was a custard cream. I perched on the end of the wooden chair that had been presented to me, clutching my knees, my heart thumping in my chest. If I did well, I thought to myself, then my life would take a magical course. The world I naively dreamed would be a generous hamper of opportunity from which I could pick things at will. The possibilities seemed endless. I could be an eccentric philanthropist, a radical philosopher, or I might end up ruling the universe, a bit like Ming the Merciless, but with considerably shorter fingernails. We discussed the Treaty of Versailles, the rise of Nazism, and the miners' strike that had been raging through the latter part of that year. 20 pits faced closure, and the Thatcher government, determined to crush the unions once and for all, had stockpiled coal and converted power stations on the quiet. The miners were doomed, the unions would be destroyed, and Britain's workforce would never be the same again. I talked about it eloquently, repeating word for word a conversation I had had with my communist grandfather a week before over half a Guinness in a pub in Battersea. The fellows nodded and occasionally raised their eyebrows. I nodded and raised my eyebrows back at them. This felt good. 2 weeks later, I had a letter in which I was offered a place to read history, conditional on me getting 2 A's and a B. Everyone around me was wide-eyed with disbelief. As moments go, it was right up there, pipping the previous top spot winner, the rain-soaked netball match where my school, Hitching Girls' School, locally known as the Whorehouse on the Hill, had finally beaten the hated Dame Alice Harper, or Posh Twat High, as we like to call them. Every single time we encountered them, they thrashed us, and in 5 long years we had never come close to equalising, let alone winning. It was galling. They would swan in, beat us, and then waft off in their air-conditioned coach, stuffing their faces with just-baked iced finger buns. We fucking hated them. But one soaking Saturday in November 1983, we were facing them again, and suddenly, somewhere in the early moments of the second half, we took the lead. It was a bit like an overweight asthmatic pub team going 1-up against Manchester United. Sensing our moment of destiny had finally come, our blood was up. Our PE teacher, Miss Nattell, the prettiest and most glamorous teacher at our school, then almost threw a spanner in the works by inexplicably attempting to abandon the match because the rain was ruining her new hairdo, but we flat refused and carried on. We held on by the skin of our teeth, and as the final whistle blew, we were a goal ahead. Victory was ours. It was a triumph for the comprehensive schooling system, and to celebrate, we went crazy on lemon squash.